If you get all your materials together ready before you start, using scissors, cut around the image of the celebrity, ready to start to position it. Get your A4 paper and decide where you'd like to position it. Not in the centre because it'll look silly, but down at the bottom, to the left or to the right, so that there's space then for you to extend the structure for your pattern. Draw around the cutout shape so that you've got an edge to the celebrity for when you cut away certain bits later on. It helps you then to create a pattern that has more of a realistic shape and structure. Now you can see where you will place it back in once you've cut away certain shapes. Inspired by Iain MacArthur, start to cut away certain sections of the face where you're going to bring the pattern in later on, and then glue it down onto the sheet. It's really important that you refer to Iain MacArthur's style to help guide you when you come to structure the way that the pattern builds up. I've used a ruler and different circular templates to draw around and build up a main structure that I can start to house the patterns and the imagery in later. I'm bringing in some of the Iain MacArthur pattern that's obviously been inspired by different cultures. I'm looking at the way that he varies his lines, his line thickness and some of the different details, and I start to bring it in certain areas. I start to bring in certain shapes or symbols or images that reflect the person that I'm looking at. My research has given me a great starting point, and I have lots of different images and ideas to do with David Bowie that I can include in my design. He was a musician, he was an actor, he was a celebrity in his own right, and so there's lots of different bits and pieces I can start to include into this design. Starting to look at how I build up the shapes, I'm going around the main structures and then thinking about how I can fill in the details in some of those larger areas. I've looked at my research images that I found about David Bowie, and I'm going to start to put certain things in there to represent certain areas of his life and career. Firstly, in Biro, I'm drawing a moon to represent his whole concept of space oddity and, you know, that fascination from the era of space travel. I'm using a biro so that I can get tones in there and make it slightly more realistic than some of the other areas, but still keeping that monochrome feel. In this closer photograph of the section, you can see how I've started to build up the marks. Continuing with the idea of the space theme, I've got a cartoon rocket and I've started to bring in the tones and the details again with the pen. Bowie was the Goblin King in the film Labyrinth, so I've brought in one of Brian Froud's goblin type figures just along the outside. I'm breaking down some of these larger shapes even further, again referring to the way that the patterns are combined in the work of Iain MacArthur, so that I can start to get a real feel for the way he uses that cultural pattern, and it can surround the drawings that I've started to put in place. I'm starting to go over the music notes, starting to make more of a feature of some of the patterns, and stopping, reflecting and thinking about what I'm doing next. I've included some words making reference to lyrics and songs, but I've drawn it in pencil so I can come back later. Here I'm drawing the reflection and the image from the crystal ball that you see in the poster for the Labyrinth film. Starting to build those tones back into it with biro and starting to just suggest the imagery inside. I start to go over the text very carefully, making changes as I go, and then I start to bring in the variegated stripes that Iain MacArthur uses in some of his work. This gives quite a 3D effect to some of those spikes that come up. I found that there was a secret alphabet for speaking Bowie, so I wrote out Ziggy Stardust and then went over it with the relevant symbols, so it was like a hidden message. Bringing in some more of the pattern from the Iain MacArthur sheets, starting to create contrast but still having that definition to the edge of the face because I left that line there at the beginning. I'm starting to work back into my drawing now with biro so that I'm trying to get rid of the feel of the photocopy and start to make it look like it's actually part of the overall piece of work. Ultimately, we will scan this and potentially do some Photoshop developments or print some of these off larger. So it needs to look like it's part of the overall design. And because of that, the tones need to be quite similar. I'm extending some of the details, almost like the Goblin King's makeup around the eyes. So I'm still bringing in different elements from the films to that. Different areas start to be built up a little bit further until I've completed the final design.